Hey, business building warrior. Welcome to Silent Sales Machine Radio. We've got a compilation episode for you today. Let me explain. Over the past couple months, 3, 4 months actually, we've been having a regular guest appear on this program, and the mini segments that we've provided from this guest have been extremely popular. It's generated a lot of conversations in our Facebook group, which, by the way, if you're not a member of our free Facebook group, there's a link at silentjimdotcom. There's about 71,000 of us in there. We're all talking about how to succeed on Amazon. People from all over the world, around the clock, talking about Amazon strategies, the strategies that we discuss on this program. So a lot of popular conversations have arisen out of the discussions we've had with the guest that we are highlighting today. And that guest, of course, is Mr. Jeff Schick. Schick. jeffschick.com is his website. He is our resident expert for all things Amazon policy and Amazon legal. I've had some great conversations with him. We've inserted these conversations into our Wednesday episodes, and you can hear them if you scroll back, these 5 to 10 minute conversations with Jeff. Well, we thought, hey, there's been some really good topics introduced in those mini segments. Let's compile them all into one episode. So if you look at the show notes, we've got a bit of a breakdown of the topics that we're going to hit today, but they're all very beneficial, very useful topics to help you stay out of trouble, avoid the red tape, avoid any delays with your account or any temporary suspensions, that sort of thing. And just to make sure that you're at ease on this subject, and you'll hear Jeff mention this several times during the multiple conversations you're about to hear us have, that the fear of suspension, the fear of losing your account is overblown. It's really not something you should be afraid of, especially if you're taking the right steps. And I can say this, having taught thousands of students for coming up on about 12 years on Amazon. We've been in e-commerce for 18, 19 years, coaching e-commerce. But for the last 12 years or so, we've been teaching Amazon strategies. And I'm aware of less than a handful of people who have been permanently suspended. And of those, they kind of gave up trying to get their account back after a short period of time. And that's the reason they remained suspended. With persistence, you can get your account back no matter what scenario you face. So permanent suspensions really aren't that big of a thing in the Amazon arena, especially if you're playing by the rules, especially if you're paying attention to the details that Jeff's going to share with us on today's program. So a very valuable episode that will do a couple things. It will inform you and equip you for success. And ideally, the goal I have is it will put you at ease as well, that Amazon's not this big, scary landscape that many people make it out to be. It just doesn't have to be, regardless of what selling model you're using, assuming that selling model is within Amazon's policies, which some aren't. For example, drop shipping. Don't ever drop ship. I'm not going to get onto that right now. But for those of you who are wondering why I would have said such a thing, yeah, we've seen a lot of permanent suspensions from people who didn't learn it from us. They learned it somewhere else and started trying to drop ship, and they did end up losing their account. But if you follow the systems and strategies that we teach in this community, your odds of losing your account are so razor thin, small, that it's not worth being worried about. All right, so let's jump over and enjoy segment after segment. Now, it's going to be a little choppy because these were separate conversations. So we'll have a little transition between them, but it's a handful of great topics. And like I said, if you go to the show notes at silentjim.com, you can see the full show notes for this episode. You can see a breakdown of all the topics that we discussed today. Enjoy this episode where Jeff and I hang out and talk through some of the most common policy and legal issues that you should be looking at, especially if you're a seller in our community following the strategies that we teach. Enjoy. What have you got for us today, Jeff?
All right. Well, Jim, I've got a bundle topic of interest. So one of the most common questions people ask me is about bundles. And I think that they're a great resource for sellers who want to get into their own branded listings, have that opportunity to differentiate themselves from the competition. And so, what we really want to just talk about is kind of, the idea of bundles done right and kind of what does that look like? And so, well, I know Jim and I will talk about a couple different things, but today's topic is going to be really focused on, which bundle, what would be an acceptable bundle when you think about it from an Amazon perspective.
And of course, you're talking about picking brands that we'd all recognize and bundling them together. And we want to be able to do it in such a way that that brand not only is protected from other sellers maybe jumping on our listing, but Amazon doesn't have a problem with it at some point, or the brand owners themselves, if we're mixing, say, candy bars or cleaning supplies together, that the brand owners
Right.
don't have a problem with it. So how can we play safe in that fun arena?
So it's a great question. So I'm gonna, pick on a brand today, and I'll full disclosure, I've never dealt with a case with this brand. So this is purely just hypothetical. They
Random.
may file IP complaints, they may not. Um, I don't know. I've never seen one from them. But today, let's pretend that the brand in question is Windex, because everyone knows what Windex is, I would assume. So, if we're going to make a bundle and we're selling Windex, let's say maybe it's Windex wipes and Windex in a bottle. That's a good bundle by itself. But how do we make it go from just a branded bundle, because that would be a branded bundle of branded Windex, and how do we make it Jeff's cleaning supply bundle? And so that's what I wanted to talk about today, is how do we do that safely? So,
What would you put in that bundle to do it safely?
so I think really the key is coming up with a third element that makes it unique. First off, you get the added benefit, because if someone sees like, oh, I've got clean, Windex wipes, I've got Windex, spray, and then you come up with a unique item that complements those. That makes it different than everything else on the market. So, like in my mind right now, I'm thinking, maybe it's a monogram microfiber towel that just has a really cool logo on it, and that you've come up with, and that's your brand. That's your trademark logo, that's your microfiber towel, and now you're selling it with something people need when they're cleaning windows with the Windex. So you've got your window cleaning towel, you've got your window cleaner, and you've got different types that people can choose from.
And it needs to be an item that you might sell separately that has some perceived or some actual value to it. It can't just be a little 3x5 note card that says Jeff's cleaning kit and write
Exactly.
on that
No,
with a
it's
pen, right? You don't suggest that.
I don't suggest that. No, I suggest the branded, the towel, that something of value, and it doesn't have to be a towel. I mean, I'm trying to think, what else goes with like
A pack
cleaning
of a
supplies?
pack of branded sponges, maybe, or in a unique
Yeah,
shape, maybe, right?
absolutely. It could even be a mat. Like I know when I clean, the sliding glass door, that oftentimes Windex comes running down, and so if I had like a mat on the floor, that would be helpful.
Right. But
Things that
something that can
people
be
want.
perceived as adding value to the bundle that you can customize and personalize that can't be duplicated maybe by another seller. Now you've got an ASIN that belongs only to you, and you're unlikely to catch any heat from the brand owners or from Amazon.
Correct. Because at the end of the day, what we want to do is stay on the right side of the bundles. Keep Amazon happy, keep the brands happy, and when you've got these really great products that complement it, everyone walks away happy.
Exactly. And what's the worst case? And I didn't set you up ahead of time for this, but we're kind of flying through this topic today.
Yeah.
But what's the worst case scenario if I do set up a bundle the wrong way? Or maybe I've got some that are set up incorrectly. Should I be losing sleep at night over this? What have you seen play out?
We've seen a variety of situations with bundles. So it really comes down to Amazon. It comes down to the brand. I wouldn't lose sleep over it, but what I might consider is, making changes. The beauty about Amazon is that you're able to, if it's your branded listing, you're able to pivot and you're able to make changes. And so the version that you ship in next week doesn't have to be the version you shipped in last week. So, let that sink in. If last week you shipped in a bundle and it didn't have the towel, maybe next week you decide that you're going to change it up, and now you're going to start selling the bundle with the towel. So, we live in an era where it's not like we have 1,000 stores we have to ship, new display cases to. We can make changes to product detail pages on the fly, and then pivot and really see what works and see what doesn't.
Beautiful. Well, anything else you can teach us about bundles before we end this short segment today?
Let's see. Well, Jim, fire away.
Well, I think that's all. I mean, that clears up in my mind,
Yeah,
because some of the things that we've seen, for example, are people put in like, a little card or, a little simply printed card or something that doesn't necessarily add value to the bundle. But you've taught us a good lesson. Say it needs to be that item that you add in needs to be something that brings value to the bundle. And
absolutely. Yeah, it brings value. Think about it from a consumer perspective. What would you, the consumer, buy?
Mhm.
And really that helps avoid all sorts of issues, because at the end of the day, if you've got that bundle with a note card, and let's say you're selling a $5 bottle of Windex and a $5 bottle pack of Windex wipes, and then you've got that note card, well, by Amazon standards you should be selling that bundle for $10.50. Not really clearing a whole lot of profit there, but if you're selling it with that microfiber towel, well, Now suddenly you can say, well, that microfiber towel is worth $5 too. Now
Right.
we're selling it for $15, much more
Right.
profit margin to play with, more money to
Exactly.
spend on PPC and everything else.
Awesome
So
tip. And we've got training in the Proven Amazon course on how to build bundles. So if you're
you
ready
sure
to jump
do.
into that
So
arena, um, beautiful.
yeah.
Why should someone put an Amazon legal expert, a lawyer, on retainer as an Amazon seller? He's got a great service that does just that. So tell us about it, Jeff.
So it's a great question. I guess first and foremost, there obviously sellers can put any lawyer on retainer. When I was in law school, I had a lawyer on retainer. They didn't happen to be an Amazon focused lawyer, which, as I learned, was expensive because I was paying them to learn Amazon, and it wasn't always the the smartest financial decision. But really, the whole benefit of having a lawyer on retainer is that you have someone as your point of contact. You have that team that you know to reach out to. So you've got me, you've got my paralegals. So when something goes wrong, you have someone that you can call for help, and you're not immediately scrambling, going, oh my gosh, what do I do now? Because I remember when I got suspended the first time, I didn't even know suspensions were a thing on Amazon. So I immediately went to Google. I copied and pasted the notice I received from Amazon because I was so confused by it. And and then of course Google starts picking up all these different articles that have been written about suspensions and different people offering services. So, having that point of contact to know who to go to when anything goes wrong is crucial. But even more importantly, having that point of contact to go to when you have questions about things that you don't know, so that things don't go wrong. Because the vast majority of my clients that I work with, don't get suspended at all. In fact, I had a seller ask me recently, they said, why aren't you posting reinstatement stories all the time about all these clients that you're reinstating? And I was like, well, I- you know, the reality is that of the clients who have had me on retainer for more than a month that we work with, um, I less than 1% of them this year have been suspended.
Yeah, it doesn't
So
happen that often. And when it does
it
happen,
doesn't.
you get them back. And you've been doing this for 4 years, and we've mentioned on other episodes, like a 99% success rate getting folks back when they do run into some trouble.
Right.
Because it's a bit of an overblown issue, but it's something we definitely do need to focus on. Um,
Right.
so
And I like to say the reason people don't like my that 1% rate isn't because Amazon's not suspending people. It's because they're calling with the questions. So, like for instance, I had a call today that with one of my clients, and they're like, I'm thinking about buying from this website. And I said, okay. And we go to it and I go, it just something's off. I'm like, I don't know what it is yet, just yet, but there's something off about it. And he goes, okay, well, what is it? And we start looking and I'm like, let's go to Google and see it. Like they have this picture of this warehouse. So let's go to Google and see if Google Maps lines up with that warehouse. Well, when we go to Google Maps and we pull up Street View, it's a different company name on the warehouse.
mm,
It's not even their warehouse. Okay, strike one. You start doing more research. And I'm like, it's not passing the smell test. There's something wrong with it. Well, on the one hand, you could sell someone can say, well, you just stopped him from potentially getting a profitable product. On the other hand, I also stopped him from having a very costly suspension if the person was in fact selling, counterfeit products. So it's calls like those that, weren't the call wasn't even about that particular issue, but it just happened to morph into talking about that. And that can be the difference between him being suspended during Q4 and not being suspended because without that call and without that person to turn to, he would have, potentially bought that product and then ended up, becoming one of those reinstatement stories you read about online.
yeah, and,
Um,
and and so a lot of the value of getting you on retainer is preventing you being suspended to begin with, because you're filtering some of the decisions you're making through someone and you're a seller, you've been there, done that,
right.
and you're familiar with our replens model around here, which is why you're such a friend of this community, as you've kind of connected those two dots better than anyone ever has before. That line of communication from Amazon to our community, from a legal perspective, just invaluable. So it's not a matter of just getting people reinstated; it's a matter of preventing them from ever being suspended to begin with.
Right. And it's having that again, it's yeah, I can't stress it enough. It's having that team, you've got your coaches on the one hand that you turn to with your Amazon questions, you've got your legal team on the others that you turn to with your legal questions. And together we're able to help just create that positive environment for sellers to succeed and really thrive. And so that's really what it's all about. It's people not having to turn to social media when making important business decisions that have long-term impacts to themselves and family and what they're doing.
Yeah,
So
using a real pro, and I appreciate the very low monthly fee to the services that you provide, and having folks on retainer. We've got you on retainer. Many of others in our community, our leaders do as well. Can't encourage it enough. As your business begins to grow, and you start asking yourself as you're falling asleep at night, "Hey, how secure is my Amazon account? I'm making some money here. I want to protect this thing." This is like buying an insurance policy, having a guy who knows his stuff. But we're going to tackle another subject today that will help put you at ease and keep you well informed on the landscape of Amazon legal issues. So, what do you got for us today, Jeff?
So, common question that people ask, and it's new sellers, old sellers, you name it, they can be, 10-year veterans, and I still get the same question. It's what gets people suspended? And
Yep.
the answer to that is, there's obviously you have to preface it. People can be suspended for a variety of reasons. Most of them are preventable. And I'd say the number one preventable suspension that we deal with is people listing on the wrong brand. And it sounds so simple, but if you look at a product detail page, the title may not match the letters that are usually in blue on desktop versions, and that so where it says brand colon insert brand here, and people a lot of times don't follow that, and that's the number one thing people get suspended for right now.
Now,
Um,
before we dive into this any further, I know a recent episode, you and I chatted, and we talked about the odds of being reinstated if you are suspended. So please go back and
yeah,
refer to that. We're not going to dive into that right now, but you said at the time, like 99% of the time, you get your clients back. You've been doing this 4 years. Suspensions, the vast majority of the time, unless you're doing something truly uh, on purpose that truly violates, and you kind of roll the dice and it. Those little accidents we make, you can get your account back. But you don't want the inconvenience of a suspension. So
absolutely.
talk us through, Jeff. Now, what do you? I have a question for you on this. You said the wrong brand listed. Talk me through an example of that, so we can kind of paint a picture of that.
So let's take a mythical listing. Let's imagine all of a sudden that Chevrolet is selling Tahoes on Amazon. And so now you can go and have it delivered in 2 days. Because obviously semiconductor shortage is gone in this hypothetical example.
Right.
But let's say Chevy Tahoes are now available for sale on Amazon. Um, if we're looking at that Chevy Tahoe, what it should say is the title might say, Chevrolet Tahoe, extended version with, leather seats and, navigation. Like that might be your title. And then, of course, you got your bullet points to say what's inside it. And the brand should be Chevrolet. Now, let's imagine for a second that we go to get on this listing, and instead of it saying the brand is Chevrolet, that it says, brand colon SUV store or some other random thing, or it might be Chevy, Chevy, or Chev space Rollet.
Gotcha. So in this scenario, I've set up a new listing selling that same item,
Yeah.
and I'm
So
setting
not
up.
you necessarily, not you as like you might be just joining an existing listing, but somebody else might have created
Someone
that
else has
listing.
set it up. Okay. So that's an even better scenario, because as a replen seller, which is the model we teach around here, a lot of times we
Right.
sell on existing listings. So someone else has set up a listing, not the brand owner, Chevrolet,
Right.
but someone else who's authorized to sell Chevys, but they used Chevy instead of Chevrolet as the brand, for example.
Correct. Or maybe they're not authorized to create listings for Chevy at all, and I find that they're gated in Chevy or Chevrolet. I mean, they're not, and they go and and that's why then all of a sudden they say, well, if I put Chev dash Rollet, now it lets me create this as a new brand on Amazon.
Gotcha.
So
Gotcha. That
we've
makes
seen it,
total
and
sense. Yeah. So that ASIN is doomed. It may last for a while. It
right.
may last for a long time. There'll be many sellers come and go and sell successfully, but eventually the sellers on that listing, it could either get shut down or they could face a suspension. What would be the first alarm bell that you might hear if you're on a listing like that?
Suspected IP. So it might get a suspected IP claim, and someone looks at it and appeals to Amazon to get it put back up, and then other people start selling again on it. or the person who got this suspected IP starts selling again on it. Similarly, Chevrolet or General Motors might go file an IP claim against it, and they might say trademark on product detail page, please remove this because our brand is misspelled. And then someone starts sending in their Chevy invoices trying to get, the listing reinstated because they've still got one, Tahoe left to sell and they don't want it to not be sold. So it's that would also be, where that could turn into a suspension situation as well.
Gotcha. And these are the types of
Another big
situations that you help
oh,
handle. You've got your monthly retainer. That's what we refer to it as a monthly retainer fee? Is that, how do you refer to that on
that's what I
jeffschick.com?
call it.
Yeah.
It's the monthly retainer. Yeah, $89 a month, and it would cover you against those suspensions. So Amazon sends you an email saying you have 72 hours to give us a plan of action, or even worse, they send you a deactivation notice. You let us know, and we take care of it because you've been a retainer client. You've been working with us, and we jump in and write those appeals for you. You don't pay anything extra, and we fight with Amazon until you're back up. So,
And then your most likely worst case scenario is you just can't sell them that ACE any longer. You're going to have to sell your Tahoe or your, maybe through a Facebook marketplace instead of Amazon at that point, right?
probably so. And the other big thing to watch out for too, with those replens, just to think about on this Chevy example. Let's say you go and you try to list that Chevrolet, and it says listing restrictions apply. You must request, ungating approval to sell this item. And you go and you submit your Chevrolet invoice. They come back and they say, we can't verify this invoice, therefore you're still gated. But then your friend tells you about this amazing Chevy listing that is also for a Tahoe. That's also another problematic area that you want to avoid, because now with Amazon, what they're saying is, oh, he couldn't sell Chevrolet, so he went and sold Chevy. Again,
Mhm.
turns in it's not a permanent problem. We've, for those cases we've worked on, we've gotten, people back from it, but it's going to be a disruption to your
Right.
business for sure.
Right. And in this case, we may have some new listeners today, Jeff. I just want to make it clear.
Yeah.
I don't know of any sellers in our community that are actually selling cars, but that was an
No,
easy
I don't
brand for
think. I
us to.
mean,
We've just kind of pulled that from the air. The
the,
brand, using the brand name properly, and typically we don't encourage our sellers. I haven't set up a new listing in a very long time. Like Jimmy, the guy that's created our replens course, I don't think he's ever set up a new listing. We just sell against existing listings. But just because the listing was already there doesn't mean it's always going to be there. It might get shut down at some point. And if you push back too hard saying, no, I have every right to sell this first sale doctrine or whatever, like, no, sometimes you can't sell it on Amazon. You're going to have to walk away from that brand or that ASIN
right,
as the prudent path forward. And that's where
exactly.
someone like you that we can bounce this off of is so valuable, man.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm happy to help. It's I think education is key to everyone's success. And even in a suspension, you can keep learning, because Amazon may hold your inventory, they may temporarily hold your money, but they can't take away your knowledge and your education and what you learn.
That's right, which makes you invaluable going forward. And like we mentioned earlier, and we mentioned every time suspensions come up, I feel like I need to say this, the vast majority of the time, your clients, 99% of the time, in my experience, having taught thousands and thousands of students how to sell on Amazon, just a tiny handful of people, I could list them on one hand, have been permanently suspended. And most of them kind of gave up and just said, I am kind of done with it anyway. So this
Right.
isn't a big issue, but you do need to pay attention to these details to keep things running smoothly. So
All right. So, a common question that I get from sellers, new and experienced. In fact, I had it on one of my calls today. They said, what is the chance that I'm going to be permanently suspended from Amazon? Mind you, this is a
love
seller
it.
has a healthy account. They're in the green. They're above 200 as their score. In fact, I think they're in the 300s. So, not a small seller by any means, and definitely not anywhere near the unhealthy category. And they're asking, are they going to be permanently suspended from Amazon?
Yeah, and we
So,
hear this a
so
lot from people who are considering growing an Amazon business. Amazon has this reputation, and I think it's probably their own fault because they call it a suspension, for example, when you're trying to get set up a new account and you haven't supplied all the information they need yet. They need another copy of your driver's license or whatever. So they suspend you
yeah,
until they get what they need. So everyone's like, oh, I got suspended on Amazon. Like, yeah, everybody does for a few hours when you're trying to sign up for your account, right? So suspensions
right.
everywhere. But this idea of a permanent suspension, I love this question. How would you answer that?
So the answer to that is it's extremely rare for somebody to be permanently suspended. In fact, you almost have to try to get that to happen. Now, that's not to
Yeah.
say that, there haven't been cases. I mean, I've got a case right now with one of the sellers where they were suspended, and they said that point blank to me, they said, "We don't care to ever sell on Amazon again. We just want all of our money back." And, we took the case and we reached out to Amazon's attorneys, and I said, once we tell them that, they're they're gonna take your word for it. And the seller says, "I don't care, I just want my money back." And so we let them know, and they said, "Okay, we were gonna, work with you, but if they don't care, then we'll write you a check for
Sure.
all of their money and
Sure.
release all their inventory." And
Right.
so they did get what they wanted. Are they permanently suspended? I mean, yes, but they're
Probably
not the
because that's what they
horse.
requested.
Right,
Well,
exactly.
I tell people all the time, Jeff, we've been teaching Amazon seller strategies for 12 plus years at this point, thousands and thousands of students, and I can still count on one hand the number of people that I know that, well, I put it this way. I'm scratching my head like, they got suspended. I'm not sure exactly why. And in a few of those cases, I found out later, well, they just kind of gave up, kind of like the client you just mentioned. But in the vast majority of cases, I'm fond of saying 95% of the time, maybe you have a different number in your mind, it's a non-issue fairly quickly. It could take some days or weeks sometimes, right? So maybe speak to that.
Right.
Like if we take that worst case scenario off the table, what are some of those other inconvenient
Right.
circumstances that people might find themselves in if they get on the wrong side of Amazon's
It,
policy?
it's so, I mean, it certainly can be inconvenient, and I don't want to downplay it at all, because when you go through a suspension, it's downright devastating. I still remember when I was in law school and I got suspended on Amazon, and it was 2 weeks of torture,
Yeah.
because you're sitting there, they're holding, at the time for me, they were holding $195,000 of money, and I had $175,000 American Express bill due. So it was the most
It's no
stressful,
joke.
2 weeks of my life. Well, we were fortunate that I was able to get reinstated very quickly, and we hadn't done anything wrong, so it was a mistake on Amazon's part, and got a nice little apology email, and they actually did wire the funds to us the next day. So instead of making us wait for a normal payout and send it by EFT, they actually did send the money by
Mhm.
wire transfer, and
They
it
can be very
arrived.
human for a huge company that's doing billions of
They can
dollars a
be.
month, right?
Right. So, but obviously that's an extreme example. So, what does a typical suspension look like? It's usually not that long. It's usually, if we're, if we're lucky, I've had suspensions that we've reinstated accounts in 20 minutes.
Mhm.
That's probably by no means the average, but that's,
Right.
the record so far is that's happened twice now, that they've been reinstated in 20 minutes. I'd say usually you're looking at a couple hours to a couple days, just depending on what the severity of the issue is and how many moving parts there are. But at the end of the day, Amazon doesn't want people to be suspended, because a suspended account doesn't generate money for Amazon. In fact,
Right.
it costs them money, because now they've got to deal with your inventory. And yes, they're going to debit your funds, but that's not like when they keep your money, it's being held in trust. It's in an escrow account. It's not money that they're earning interest on. It's not being used for operating. They're not investing in a robot. Like, that money is being set aside as a liability on their balance sheet, and it's certainly by no means an asset. And so they don't want people's money. They're doing that because of potential, risk mitigation that they have to incur. So at the end of the day, we've seen Amazon this past year be extremely human. I think, as of now, almost every account suspension we've worked on has been reinstated. There's
Yeah,
only
that's
just a
an
very,
interesting statistic. You've worked on a good number of accounts. I don't know if you're at liberty to share how many, but what is your ratio? What's your success rate?
it'd be probably north of 98%. But, again, that 98%, it's sometimes, it may take a couple months to get there on certain
Sure.
accounts that have major, major problems.
Right.
So, but that's the exception, not the norm. So,
I love it. Well, and from my vantage point, again, just so folks know that are listening or watching this today, you're the most experienced guy with the most integrity and validation from my vantage point at doing what you do. So we're thrilled to have you in this community. And I think this
yeah.
short little episode, now there's always more that we can share. Maybe we'll do it in another segment soon about some of the specific behaviors and things that people need to watch out for. But just knowing that unless you're one of the really, really bad guys that's really trying, like you're trying to sell Nike
Yeah.
shoes up with knockoffs you brought in from China and you're just really going in deep,
Right.
violating serious policies on purpose. As long as you're not one of those guys, you're just kind of innocently making some mistakes. The vast majority of the time, you're going to be okay.
Correct.
That's good to know.
And it's most of it's recoverable. And it's, I mean, especially for the innocent people, I don't think we've ever had a case where someone was innocent and they didn't get back on.
Yeah,
The
I love
cases
it.
that are, the cases where people didn't get back on, well, obviously
They knew they were
privilege comes
taking
into
they
play,
were
but
rolling the dice and they knew it.
yes. And so that's, it happens. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, really trying to avoid fear. And then I don't know if I've shared this with you, but I just passed my 4-year anniversary of when I became a licensed attorney. And literally the first day I became an attorney was when I worked on my first Amazon case in the attorney client role. And so I've been handling Amazon suspensions now for 4 years, and
Congratulations,
I
man.
love it.
Yeah,
There's only
and
one other attorney in the space up in, CJ, that has done as many, suspensions as I have. So
well,
it's fun.
well done, man. We're thrilled to work with you, and you've been at our events, and many people in our community begin to rely on you. You have a great monthly retainer program. Why don't you explain that for a moment, and folks can go check that out on your website.
Yeah. So after I got suspended back when I was, in law school, immediately I started calling people, and it was like thousands of dollars here, thousands of dollars there. One guy who wasn't a lawyer quoted me $15,000 to get my account back. And when I asked him what was his chance of success, he said he couldn't guarantee any sort of results. So of course I, being the stubborn law student I was, I figured out how to do it myself. But so that really sparked this desire to come up with, a low quality or low cost.
Low
Can
cost, high quality is probably what you meant there.
yeah.
That's all right, man.
Can we
Hey, this
edit
is
that
just two
part
very
out?
real dudes hanging out, man. That's all good.
So when I was suspended, I really, came up with this idea that we needed to have high quality, affordable attorneys in the space because it didn't exist. And so that's really where I came up with this idea behind it. So it's $89 a month. You can talk to me. You can talk to my paralegals anytime you schedule calls with us. We're happy to walk you through issues, on a proactive basis. So that way you don't get in trouble. And then also we're there to help you on the reactive side if you do. You don't pay anything extra. So anything that happens on Amazon or Walmart, you're covered. And we take care of it for you from, A to Z so that you don't have to worry about it.
And that's phenomenal because I know in this industry, there's a good number of players and they'll charge you thousands of dollars to handle some of the circumstances that you cover. Hey, we'll get back to the show in just a second, but I've got to tell you about a great sponsor who's just joined us. I'm talking about Seller Board. This is a very popular service used by many Amazon sellers in our community because they understand how important it is, how crucial it is to know your numbers. How do you know how profitable you are? All those fees, the different expenses, the cost of goods sold. How do you track it all? Seller Board is phenomenal. Starting as low as just $15 a month with a 2-month trial on top of that. You really need to check these guys out. Get over to silentjim.com/numbers. Again, silentjim.com/numbers. It's time to know your numbers. It's an accurate profit analytics software tool just for Amazon sellers. They've been doing this since 2017. It is a really cool tool doing some things that I'm unaware of anyone else doing. So the pricing starts at $15. Like I said, get your 2-month trial at silentjim.com/numbers.
So I have an interesting one. This is a very commonly asked question, and it's very commonly people don't know the answer. It is, what should a seller do when they get an IP complaint? And so,
Great
because,
question.
the more you sell, the more there's odds are going to happen. You're going to get an IP complaint. It's not a matter of if, but when. And having that plan in place is kind of like almost like, coming up with your emergency plan so that well, what are you going to do? So that way you think about it now when you're not stressed, so that when it happens, you already know what steps you're going to take.
Yeah. And I don't want to say that it's inevitable, but with the model that we teach, it probably is going to happen at some point. And everyone gets nervous when they see that first IP complaint. So walk us through first, maybe let's start here. how serious is this, or how serious could it be? What's my worst case scenario? And then let's talk about, what do you do when you get
Yeah.
one?
So, worst case scenario is an interesting one. Because Amazon has a variety of different actions they can take depending on the type of claim. So the worst case scenario claim would probably, in my book, would be a seller having a what's called a confirmed counterfeit. That's where a brand went onto your listing, they bought the product from you, the seller, they then looked at it. They maybe maliciously, we've had it happen with a couple brands so far this year, where then they go to Amazon and they say, "I want to make a complaint through brand registry and file counterfeit." And then Amazon has a question. This next question down is, "Did you buy this product?" And if they check yes and supply an order number, now we've pushed it from the counterfeit without a test buy into the confirmed counterfeit category. And so in those cases, it can drop a seller's account health rating down to 0, and it can result in suspensions. So that's your worst case scenario. The most common IP complaints we see are counterfeit without a test buy. Those have about a 4 to 10 point impact on the account health rating. Amazon can double it in certain circumstances, so it could go up to 20 points. But either way, since you're starting at 200, even if you had 20 points taken off, that's not pushing you into the red zone because you still have dozens of more points to go before you get suspended. So it's something to be mindful of. I'm not saying, hey, just start selling anything and everything that gets IP claims. They don't matter, because that's not what I'm saying. But
That's not the message we want to send. Certainly, you do want to try to avoid them, absolutely, and stay above board, and
right.
keep good records and only buy from reputable sources. But we did actually have one of those where we, innocently enough, bought a small handful of a product that did generate that counterfeit IP complaint as confirmed by a purchase. And we had no idea that it was a counterfeit, but they came back and showed us, hey, the packaging is actually completely different. And we had bought it from, it was like some kind of closeout. We used to do that. We don't do it anymore. This has been like 5 years ago. I don't ever buy anything from like closeouts, discount bargain barns, with bins of stuff. Like, I don't sell that stuff on Amazon. Maybe that'll be a good segment for us to do sometime. But it happened to me,
Absolutely.
and we weren't suspended. We had to stop selling it, and we had to create a plan of action, and we were fine. Is that the case most of the time?
So to answer your question, when someone gets an IP claim, they don't often cause sellers to immediately get suspended. But left unaddressed and left, where they continue getting more, definitely it can cause suspensions to happen. Now, there's an interesting. I was asked this question today by a client. They said, "What what is Amazon expecting in terms of me to address this violation?" It says on here, "Your submission is required." The person on the phone told me I must address this as promptly as possible. What does that an acceptable timeline look like? And the answer to that is it depends. But it's typically not, it's somewhere between as fast as they want you to reply and as slow as you possibly can, so that you figure out. And the reason for that, is that you need to figure out the facts. And so a big part of what my team does is that we do fact finding. So anyone that submits an IP claim, the first step before, an attorney ever even touches the case, is that we have one of our paralegals go through the case and look at all the facts, because believe it or not, what sellers see and what we see can be two different things. And of course, what Amazon sees could also be door number 3. And so our goal is to make sure that we have all of our facts lined up in a row, all of our documentation in order before we ever even start thinking about going to Amazon. Because the last thing we want to do is go to Amazon and say, here's an interesting case I worked on recently. Let's say the product in question is Velcro, and we have a private label listing that says Velcro on it because it has Velcro. It claims to have Velcro straps. And the Amazon account health rep would say, "Oh, just turn in your invoice from your manufacturer." Well, what if our manufacturer's in China and it doesn't talk about Velcro at all? It talks about hook and loop closure. Well, submitting that invoice to Amazon isn't going to clear up the IP claim because it's going to raise more red flags.
Right.
So a big part of what my team does is we look at all the facts of the case. We come up with a summary. That's when it then gets handed to myself, and I start looking at the case and really, coming up with the attack plan of how we're going to, what's the diagnosis and what's the treatment plan. And then from there, we come up with, the next steps on how to address the IP claim. So, good for sellers as coming up with this, this whole concept of IP claim emergency plan. Step one really is to get your documentation in order, because you can't make any decisions if you don't know what you're dealing with. So, let me repeat that because I think it's important. If you don't know what you're dealing with, you can't address the problem. It's so first step is collect all your receipts. You know, look at what you sold. We have I've had sellers where they're like, I swear it was Nike. It was a Nike shirt, and then we pull the receipts and it's Champion. And
Mhm.
that's, and Nike doesn't file IP claims. So before people get freaked out thinking that Nike or Champion file IP claims, because they don't, or have not, I should say, they haven't. I'm not saying that they do, but it's a lot of times people will get hung up and they'll be like, it was a Nike listing, the PDP says Nike, and then we look at it and it's like, no, the product detail page or PDP says, brand XYZ. So really, we collect all the data up front, figure out what kind of issue you have, and then now you're able to then come up with next steps. And maybe that next step is that you decide that you're going to appeal it on your own. That's some sellers are confident doing that.
Yeah,
I would
certainly.
say, one thing is if you get one rejection on your own, it might be time to think about looking for help, because the way Amazon's system works, they keep a record. And so every rejection gets stacked in there. And by the time, I had one seller come to me recently, they had submitted 12 appeals. This was for an account suspension. They had submitted 12 appeals on their own before they sought professional help. And going into it, I told him, I'm like, I'm prefacing this case that this is going to be tough, because when we submit your appeal that I write for you, this agent now has on monitor, on right monitor, they've got your appeal that I just wrote for you that they're looking at. And on the left monitor, they've got 18 red X's saying that you've been rejected with notes next to it why it's been rejected. It's really hard on number 19 for them to push the button and then have to write an explanation why they're overturning 18 other people that they said no, that said your account should stay, deactivated. On that case, we did win. That person took the time, they read it, and they reinstated the account on the first appeal.
That's
So it worked.
phenomenal. Yeah, and that's the value of working with someone who knows what data and facts needs to be gathered and how to write that appeal. And I don't want these segments to cause anyone's heart rate to go up or for anyone to lose any
Yeah,
sleep. Quite the opposite. Once you've
right.
got a pro in your corner, the vast majority
You
of the
don't.
time, these things all turn out okay. But you are going to see some of these. We're selling on someone else's platform and we're selling other brands that we don't own. There's going to be friction from time to time, but uh,
Absolutely.
don't let that take away from the opportunity as long as you're dealing with a pro. So when you get an IP complaint, gather your information, gather your facts. And if you're not a client of Jeff's, maybe that's a good time to start thinking about hiring someone who knows what they're doing to help you manage this scenario. But any other tips? I know this is a kind of a can of worms. IP complaints can go in so many different directions. Like, how many different kinds of IP complaints are there? How do you
Ooh.
categorize them?
So let's think about it. I like to categorize IP complaints by, and this is just received IP. We're not even going to talk about suspected IP or product authenticity complaints, but just on received IP complaints alone, there's trademark category, there's copyright, and there's patents. Those are the top three categories that we look at. Now, within trademark, there's subcategories. So there's trademarks on product, trademark on product detail page, counterfeit without a test by, parallel imports, which is actually a new one we should talk about, and because that just rolled out into the United States a couple weeks ago. And then there's trade dress. Trade dress, no one ever talks about. No one really even knows about it. And for arbitrage sellers, they'll never need to know about it. But it's funny nonetheless. The Hallmark case in the Supreme Court case law is actually Taco Bell. They sued Taco Cabana, which is a Texas version of Taco Bell, although I think much better. And they basically they both got into a lawsuit over who copied whose table design colors, because they each used different tile on the same tile on their table. and said
Wow.
that that was the hallmark of their store. So,
Huh.
but okay, so that's trademark. Within copyright, we've got copyright on product, we've got copyright on product detail page. We then also have this other sort of weird copyright that very seldomly comes up, but it's copyright counterfeit. That has to do with media and books, so DVDs, CDs, and books and other printed stuff. And then within patents, design and utility patents are the most common ones sellers would ever interact with. But again, typically only comes up for private label sellers that have to worry about the patent cases.
Gotcha. Well, that's fascinating to me. It just demonstrates the level of knowledge and experience that you've had, 4 years doing this and helping Amazon sellers dig out of these little scary pits they find themselves in quite efficiently
Thank you.
and with a high success rate.
So, what I want to talk about today is generic product listings and kind of the pitfalls and things to watch out for with them. So, when you think of generic, what comes to your mind, Jim?
Yeah, I think of a brand that isn't really associated with anything major. The generic brand maybe would be the store label brand, at a
Right.
at a grocery store. That's what comes to mind for me.
So I think about it even a little bit more simplistic than that. Like, you think about like pickles, and you go to the grocery store and you see, I think Vlasic is like the big one that people see in the States. And so you've got Vlasic pickles. That's obviously a brand. And if you get Publix pickles, then that's a brand as well. So what would be a true generic in my mind would be the tomato, that tomato that's sitting on the shelf that has no sticker designating where it came from
Right.
whatsoever,
Right.
completely unbranded. So when we think about Amazon, they've been really cracking down on these generic listings. So people have been, sometimes unfortunately, when you're finding replens, um, you might find a product that has a listing, and you see two listings. And one of them is, I don't know, let's find, what is our replen today? It's going to be Logitech mouse because that's sitting in front of me. So we've got
Sounds
a
good.
Logitech mouse, and we found this amazing stock of hundreds of Logitech mice that we're going to send in. And we go to create a listing, and Logitech is gated. And so some sellers will say, well, I've got 100 Logitech mice that I just bought. What do I do with them? And they'll go and they'll create a new listing, and they'll type in Logitech, and Amazon will say, no, you can't use Logitech because it's already taken. So what we've been seeing a rise of is sellers who said, okay, well, I can't take Logitech. I'm going to just put, this mouse looks generic enough to me. I'm just going to say it's generic. And I'm going to sell this as a generic mouse, and then list it as a Logitech mouse in the title and the bullet points and a description. So that's where Amazon's been cracking down over the last, I'd say probably 1.5 to 2 weeks. They've been cracking down pretty harshly against those types of listings. And so we want to watch out for it and make sure that that we're not listing on them, because those wouldn't be the proper listing. It should be Logitech.
So even if you're not the original seller who set up the bad listing,
Yeah.
you could still be punished for selling against it, because you could be an innocent replen seller who has 2 or 3 units to sell, and you find this great performing ASIN, but the brand is generic. Or as we've mentioned in a past session, it's maybe a misspelled version of Logitech, Logi-Tech or something, to try to get past the filters. Avoid those. You don't want that brand field to misrepresent the actual brand, or you will probably be sitting on an ASIN that will eventually be pulled and shut down.
Right. And what's been really odd about these cases that I've seen over the last week, the sellers that are affected have, they're replen sellers. They did not create these listings. And what's even more concerning is that in one case, or I should say in 3 cases, I have 3 separate sellers. They were all listed against the same ASIN that was listed as generic. What's even more concerning is that listing wasn't taken down. So Amazon identified the problem. They
Hmm.
suspended these sellers that were listed on the ASIN, but they didn't take the ASIN down. So now there's new sellers going in on that listing that are doing the exact same thing and mistakenly listing on it.
It's
So
almost like it's a trap sitting there waiting for people to step on it or something.
it is really weird. It's a minefield for sure.
Yeah.
It's definitely like a landmine. So
Yeah. And anytime we say suspension, what are the prospects of these folks getting their accounts back? It's always a painful, inconvenient thing for sure. But you feeling good about the accounts being restored?
absolutely. Yeah. We've restored, 2 of them so far in the last couple weeks here. They sometimes can take longer than others. Unfortunately, this type of suspension is what we would call a fraud category. So Amazon generally, splits suspensions into different categories. So there's, performance related, late shipment rates, order defects, things like that. Those are, I'd call those your diet suspensions, because a good plan of action and some solid, corrective actions will get you back pretty fast. You've got your intellectual property suspensions. Those are, you sold a listing that has a trademark complaint or counterfeit or copyright. Again, inconvenient, but recoverable in most cases, as long as you've got good documentation and weren't intentionally selling counterfeits. And then the third category is the fraud category. And those are, where people have engaged in actions that Amazon thinks are fraud, even though, as I know, these are innocent sellers that were never intending to defraud anyone. It's just Amazon, it has that appearance. And so the whole, as soon as we can convey to Amazon that this was just a mistake, that it's not fraud, and that this won't happen again, their goal is to get productive, non-fraudulent sellers back on the platform. Whereas the sellers that were intentionally engaging in fraud, well, those sellers obviously do not get back on the platform.
Right. Right. And so just to sum up, how can we prevent this type of challenge in our account? Can we search our entire inventory for brand generic?
You can, yeah, go to manage inventory, hit that search field and type in generic. And if you have anything that matches, it's going to come back. And that's a perfect time to re-examine those listings. Ideally, you'll type that in and hit search, and it'll say 0 results found. And
if you do find some, what should you do?
Well, if you do find them, yeah, I don't know, talk to me, come up with a plan, because, the first step would be obviously to delete them. And then second step is come up with a plan for how do we handle it next, and keep a list of anything you delete, because Amazon is data driven. If you delete 17 ASINs that you find that said generic, open a Word doc and copy all those ASINs as you're deleting them. So that way, that you have a record. If it ever comes back up again, that you can say, hey, Amazon, we identified this problem on, November 1st or November 2nd, whatever day it may be. And these are the ASINs we deleted.
And they'll look more favorably if you make a mistake. They're like, okay, this is the guy who's trying to play by the rules.
Correct.
Great tip.
Well, I want to talk about storage space today. So a lot of sellers have been reporting that their storage limits got cut by Amazon for FBA. And I just, wanted to talk about, ways we can mitigate the challenge that poses, some alternative options. And then, of course, for sellers that need more storage space, how you can go about getting some more storage space as well. So,
okay. So for the FBA sellers who rely on Amazon to store our inventory, in many cases, now this hasn't happened to me. It's happened to a couple coaches on our team, and a few people have reported it. I think one of our coaches lost almost half their storage space, where Amazon said, hey, you've only got half as much space as you had yesterday. Sorry. So what's causing this? And more importantly, what do we do about it?
Absolutely. So I think, number one, what's causing it is staffing issues. Amazon is in a sense, they're understaffed and overpromised for the holiday season. And so they're in, I guess like fireman mode right now, trying to put out this massive dumpster fire of not having enough people to work in their warehouses. So they have tons of products flowing in every single day, tons of orders coming in every single day, and not enough people and robots to ship the orders out. So we've got, a massive logistical challenge that Amazon's trying to solve. And what we're seeing now is one way they're solving it is they're putting storage limits on, because if you have, 5,000 square feet of storage devoted to one seller who uses all of it, then it means that another seller can't get 500 square feet if they've already maxed it. So they're reducing some sellers dramatically. Some sellers are not affected at all. It really just seems to be all across the board.
It's a little random almost in its application. Huh?
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen some massive sellers lose their storage space, which tells me that perhaps they're trying to equalize the playing field. It might be the case, but of course, it's Amazon. Who knows what the rationale is behind the
Sure. Typically, it's numbers driven if you drill down, and it's customer service driven if you really drill down. But it feels kind of random on the playing field for third party sellers right now.
Absolutely.
So, what are you advising sellers to do? How do you prevent it if that's possible? And what are our options to absorb the blow if it does happen?
So preventing it, unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any good option for preventing it. It's numbers driven, like you said. So Amazon is making those decisions and letting you know after they've made it. So there's really not a great solution there for it. But in terms of how to mitigate the effect on your business, that's where we can really shine. And so sellers that are quick to pivot are the ones that can benefit the most from it. And so let's talk about what that looks like. So, Jim, when I was talking to you about this earlier, a little while ago, you had a great idea. You said FBM, and
Right. Merchant
that's,
fulfill, baby. Just
yeah,
like when COVID struck, those of us who are prepared to use our garage or hire a friend or find some local storage space and list product as merchant fulfill
right.
cleaned up. And I think
Absolutely.
we're going to see the same thing as a result of this.
I think so. So anyone who is eligible to ship merchant fulfilled, now keep in mind, some during holiday season, they sometimes don't let newer sellers use merchant fulfilled.
Right.
I can't remember what the deadline is this year. We may have already passed it, but if we haven't passed it yet, there is if you get a certain number of orders in merchant fulfilled before the deadline, you get to merchant fulfilled during Q4. And it's absolutely worth your while, even if that means going out and buying, I think one year it was 50 units. Go out and buy 50 units of something at the dollar store, put it for
Right.
sale for 25 cents if you have to.
Yes.
Obviously, you notice I just said we're losing money on every sale. If you buy it for $1 and you sell it for 25 cents, there's no profit there.
Yeah. But you
But this,
qualified now to fulfill your own orders. Like
correct.
eBay sellers have to do year round, right? You as orders come in, you're fulfilling it. You could use a prep center, you could use your garage, you can use a single mom across the street, but fulfill your own orders.
Absolutely. So fulfillment by merchant, that's step one for mitigation if you can do it. One thing that a lot of sellers forget about, and I'm guilty, I forget about it too. You are allowed to have an FBA offer and an FBM offer on the same listing. Which means,
Absolutely.
yeah, like if you have, let's say you bought 10 pairs of Nike sneakers at the store, and then you don't have enough storage space for footwear to send in all 10 pairs. Well, maybe you send in 3 and keep 7. 3 FBA off, 3 going as an FBA offer. You open up a secondary offer for merchant fulfilled for your quantity of 7. By all means, put them there. Here's something, even another tip you can use. You bought 10 sneakers. The day you buy them at the store, you have 10 available. The day UPS picks up those 3, you've got 7. Because what if someone comes in and orders 10 pairs for their entire school team between when you bought it at the store and when Amazon picks it up? Sell it FBM,
That's
ship it
right.
out, and then you've got 3 pairs of sneakers for something else.
So part of the beauty of FBM, merchant fulfill, is you could be standing in store checking out your
Yeah.
inventory. Those 10 pairs of sneakers, you're standing there checking out at a retail store, and you list them merchant fulfill, and they sell before you even pay for them at the register. We hear stories like that. You can't do that with FBA, where it takes a week or two, and Q4 it could take 3 or 4 weeks sometimes for it to get listed and available in the
Right.
system. So you're making sales a lot faster too. So it's very healthy to integrate merchant fulfill, and that is a great way to pivot if you find yourself. And for those of us who sell in the hazmat category, I mean, I don't know of anybody that's got a huge hazmat storage space. We're playing with this little tiny square, I don't remember what it was, a couple hundred square foot. Not even it's tiny. I remember what it is,
Mine's
cubic
10
feet or
square
whatever.
feet. It's like
But
tiny.
it's about $500 to $1,000 worth of product at a time. That's all we can sit in there,
Yeah.
and we sell a ton of this stuff. But we're limited, so we do merchant fulfill a lot of it.
Right. Now, so that's one option. Option 2 is just-in-time fulfillment. Now, just-in-time fulfillment is believe it or not, a Toyota concept. They're the ones that innovated it. And it's the idea that you send in inventory in smaller numbers and increased frequency.
Mhm.
So if you have those 10 sneakers and you don't want to use up all 10, maybe you only have a limit of 10 sneakers. Well, we're not going to send, and we've got 10, let's assume we've got 100 pairs of sneakers with 10 different styles, 10 different ASINs, and 10 of each. Well, your options are you could send in all 10 of one ASIN, but now you've got 90 sneakers that are not selling. Or you could send in 1 of each ASIN and then have 9 of each to fill. And as those sell, you just keep sending in, every single day, grab another pair of sneakers, ship it into FBA. Obviously, it's not your most cost-effective option, but it's better than having inventory sit on the shelf and not sell at all. It's also better than not selling a period. So
Yeah, it's better to consistently trickle in inventory than it is to send a big load of it and it sits in Amazon's warehouse. They're going to typically punish you for that over time with, not just with the storage fees, with potentially with lower storage space available to you. Now, you were telling me you're hearing from some sellers who are able to buy more space. Talk me through that.
So there have been some reports of sellers reaching out to seller support and saying, I need more space, and then being redirected to a buy more inventory space page. I do not know if that's available to every seller or if it's only available to certain sellers, but I know that there are some sellers that have successfully bought more. It doesn't come cheap. It's Amazon is, because I guess in Amazon's eyes, if you're going to buy more storage space from them, you're taking away storage space from other sellers they're getting for free. So
Right.
they're going to
Right.
make you pay that premium for it. But for
Right.
for sellers that have the margins and have the volume to support it, it makes a heck of a lot of sense, because if you have to pay Amazon an extra dollar, but you can make $10, then obviously we've netted. Now, if you're having to pay Amazon $10 to make $1, that's not a smart trade. So everyone has to evaluate that option in light of their
It's a
finances.
math decision. Yeah.
Well, we want to talk about red flags for replens. So, and red flags being IP related red flags. So, thanks for having me on, and I'm excited to talk about the subject.
Let's go, man. It sounds like a good one.
All right. Well, intellectual property, as many of y'all know, is one of my passions. And so, around IP, we've obviously got patents, we've got trademarks, we've got copyrights. Now, luckily for a majority of sellers, when it comes to replens, we don't have to worry about the patent ones, but we do have to worry about copyrights and trademarks. And so that's what we'll really be focusing on today. If you have a patent issue that pops up when it comes to a replen, that is going to be a more complicated issue, and certainly not something we'd want to cover on a webinar. So talk to me or my team directly, and we'll help you through that. But for the other issues, we'll talk about the red flags to avoid, and that way you guys can get some more profitable products in your catalog.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, without further ado, let's talk first about copyrights. Copyrights are the most basic element of intellectual property protection. They can be somewhat problematic for replens, primarily if you didn't create the listing yourself, which most replen sellers do not create their own listings.
Correct.
So what you want to watch out for, though, is listings that have been created by other sellers that may use the copyright elements of the brand without the brand's consent. And so what does that look like? Well, if we're listing on, say, a multi-pack, and we notice that the manufacturer does not sell a 2-pack, but then we go to the single pack and we see that the photos and the bullet points and the text are exactly the same, AKA they've been copied and pasted. That is a clear indication that there could be a copyright concern to watch out for. So how do we mitigate that? Well, we probably stay away from that listing. The correct mitigation would be to actually edit the listing, take out the infringing content. However, if you're a brand new seller on that listing, you're not going to have detail page control. So it's going to be far easier just to find a different product to sell instead, and just view that as a red flag just to avoid that product. Now, if you go on to, let's say we've got a Tide Pod listing, we've got a 2-pack of 2 bags of Tide Pod, and it has photos taken by clearly not Tide. All the bullet points are unique to the product that are not written by Tide. That's fine. So what we're really talking about here are those direct copy and paste situations. We want to avoid those to avoid copyright claims. So
excellent summary. And you want to make sure that the brand is correct. That doesn't say
absolutely.
generic, as we learned on a recent episode.
Yes, absolutely. And that brings us into trademarks. So thank you for this great segue.
I was helping you segue. There we go.
You got it. So for the second big thing we want to talk about is trademark. So trademark infringement is not quite as cut and dry as copyright. So with trademarks, it has to do with likelihood of confusion. So, which is the big test that the courts use. Whereas copyright, most of the courts use the test of, is it copied? It's a lot easier to answer that question. With trademark, it has to do with likelihood of confusion. So what do we mean by that? Well, let's go back to that 2-pack example. We've got 2 boxes of, Land O'Lakes butter that we bought on sale at the store, and we're going to try to sell, FBM as a replen. Well, if we go on and there's a Land O'Lakes 1-box listing, and there's not a 2-box listing, or we find a 2-box replens listing, but it's not endorsed by the brand, that would be something to watch out for. So where does trademark become an issue? If you've got incorrect product brand name, that can be grounds for a trademark infringement claim against the listing. Similarly, if you've got if you have a trademark case where you've got the misspelled brand name, that can also lead to trademarks. Generic, as you mentioned, is a big one to watch out for. Other things we've seen manufacturers take down duplicate listings or these multi-pack listings for is having incorrect brand names. So I should have picked something that I knew. Land O'Lakes, I don't know who owns them, but
right. And I don't know many resellers that sell refrigerated items on replens.
I know, it's probably a bad
Stay
example.
away from those. Right.
Probably a bad example anyways, all around. Well, to keep it, again, in the spirit of keeping it going, let's just make it up and say Land O'Lakes is owned by Mayfield, which might be accurate, but probably isn't. if you put in on the manufacturer, if you go and you find the Land O'Lakes single pack and it says the manufacturer is Mayfield, and then you go and you find this multi-pack and the manufacturer is listed as Land O'Lakes, that would be a red flag to watch out for because the information doesn't match. Unfortunately, some law firms like Voorhees have started using those mismatches as grounds for trademark infringement claims against the listing. Now, we haven't seen them sue anybody over it, which is the good news. The bad news is that they do take down the listings because they'll go in and they'll file an IP infringement and say, Land O'Lakes is owned by Mayfield. Mayfield is the manufacturer, and the listing shows that the manufacturer is Land O'Lakes, and therefore you need to take down the listing. So that's just something to watch out for as well. That can be a problem area there. So
great advice and great input. And I know there's frequent times, I would say most of us who are selling on Amazon, every couple months or so, there's something where we think to ourselves, man, I wish I had a legal expert I could bounce this off of.
Absolutely.
How can folks go about securing your services, Jeff?
So that's why I came up with the retainer plan I did. So it's $89 a month. Whenever you come up with these legal questions, you just simply bounce them off me or my team. We can help you answer them, whether they're legal, whether they're Amazon, they could be Walmart, eBay, you name it. Bring the questions to us. We either will know the answer or we'll know how to get you to someone who does know the answer. So, we're the first to send someone back. If someone's working with one of the coaches here and they ask me a question that I can't answer, I send them right back to the coach and I say, phrase it this way. And the coach will know exactly what you need to do. So,
beautiful.
That's the beauty of having
go ahead.
I was gonna say that's the beauty of working with Jim's coaches and us together, because I actually had a case recently with one of Jim's coaches and one of his coaching students. And the coaching student didn't know how to do certain things that we were advising him to do. And we got on a conference call with me and the coach and the coaching student, and we resolved everything on a Zoom. It was
fantastic.
Beautiful.
I appreciate the way you serve this community. It's something I really appreciate about you too, Jeff, is I know up until we began a relationship with you, we saw many sellers spending thousands and thousands of dollars for relatively simply resolved issues. And for $89 a month, that's just tremendous. I know that. I know you're going to probably lock that in and you're going to grandfather folks in, but man, that's a steal. It really is for the services you provide. When we'd see people get suspended and have to go spend $5,000, $6,000, $8,000 to get their account back. And you offer all those services for $89 a month. It's tremendous. So I appreciate the value you bring to our community.
Thank you so much. We appreciate being a part of it. So
shoutout.com, just like the razor, is a good way to say it, right? We'll stick a link in the show notes. People can go check it out. So we'll do this again real soon. Okay, Jeff?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy. Talk to you soon. Hey, thanks for hanging out today. Before I let you go, one short reminder. We are so grateful to our new sponsor to this program, Sellerboard. If you haven't checked them out yet, get over to silentjim.com/numbers. This is the software that tells you if you're profitable or not. It helps you track all of your expenses, your KPIs, sales, refunds, advertising costs, all of it. Profit, loss. This is tremendous software that fills a gap in the marketplace. Many successful sellers in our community are using this tool to help them know which of their products are profitable and which ones aren't. You'll love Sellerboard. For just $15 a month starting, you can really dial in and know how your business is doing. silentjim.com/numbers. Talk to you next time.